Hello, I'm Darryl Anderson and welcome to Groundcover TV. This episode we've decided to do something a little different and present the program from one of GRDC's farm business updates. This one's at Bendigo and it's part of a new initiative from GRDC to raise the management capacity of farm advisors and growers. More about that later, because here's what's coming up in this episode of Groundcover TV. The Weed Seed Wizard, controlling weeds before they see the light of day.
The idea of a calculating tool to keep track of weed seed banks came up as something that people thought was desirable, researchers and the farmers themselves.
Also, regional solutions for chickpea growers.
CISA 603 has been trialled throughout southern Australia, and even though it is very well adapted for WA, it is well suited to southern Australia.
And Australian durum, helping growers meet international demand.
Well production is pretty much static, but the demand for pasture is increasing, particularly in Asia, and we see a potential there.
Those stories and a lot more, plus a special feature on the Groundcover newspaper which has reached an impressive milestone, all in this episode of Groundcover TV.
Oil prices just demand driven, both sides.
This farm business update is kind of a joint venture between GRDC and farm business management specialists, with the outcome being better farm business decision making. Our first story is also about a GRDC partnership, an intriguing thing called the Crop Biofactories Initiative.
Designing a new crop for Australia is pretty exciting.
Craig Wood has put his background in molecular biology and genetic engineering to good use, developing an industrial oil, and it comes from an often overlooked plant, the humble safflower.
It's an ancient crop, very undeveloped, very underutilised in Australia, and I think some of what I've managed to bring is some of these very modern techniques to this ancient crop.
It's all thanks to the Crop Biofactories Initiative, a joint partnership between GRDC and CSIRO to develop biomaterials, industrial substances used to make building materials, plastics and polymers sourced from plant products rather than mineral oils.
The Biofactories Initiative is really about finding new uses for grain and new crops that growers can grow that will make them more money.
It's really a long-term alliance to try and develop industrial products from crop plants so that Australian farmers can participate in the renewable industries of the future.
Safflower is an ideal choice as it's currently not widely grown in Australia but potentially has a large growing area. It has agronomic advantages as a summer break crop with drought resistance and a large taproot. After 8 years research, the team have a world first.
We now are up to about 95% oleic acid, so it's almost perfectly pure oleic acid. It's the highest purity of any fatty acid in any kind of oil, and I think that is very exciting.
This puts it in the category of an industrial chemical.
It's a breakthrough for the Crop Biofactories Initiative because it's the first target product that we have been able to make in safflower, and I guess it's the start of the pipeline for other products that we hope to produce in safflower.
So what's the benefit of increasing oleic acid levels to 95%? Oilseeds usually contain a mixture of saturated, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Industrial products need a high purity of monounsaturates.
The monounsaturates are useful in two ways. Firstly, they have a very high stability, so if we're using the oil in industrial applications like a lubricant, for instance, a high temperature application, the oil has to be extremely stable, and monounsaturates, oleic acid, give that stability. Also, it's useful as a chemical feedstock because we can break that molecule in the middle, if you like, and make two shorter molecules that can go into polymer production and replace petrochemicals in those products.
And that means the production of nylon and polymer.
This may not look much like a chemical lab for the production of plastics, adhesives and lubricants, but in one way, that's just what it is.
And with fossil fuels on the decline, an alternative to petrochemicals is welcome news.
There's all those wonderful advantages when you look at grain-based products now, and they're a renewable product. and that's the beauty of them.
Industry has been asking for this kind of product for many years. They're prepared to pay more for these kinds of oils because it's something that they can't get from any other source.
We're already seeing demand on the rise.
The super high oleic oil will end up predominantly in biolubricants, so replacing petroleum-based lubricants. Very good for sensitive applications in the environment because these are biodegradable and will have high stability.
Demand is increasing from the plastics and polymer sector too. Car manufacturers want to produce components like dashboards and engine parts out of renewable plastics. And it's not just heavy industry looking to biomaterials.
Some of the major companies are starting to use bio-based products in their packaging. Coca-Cola has a bottle which is replacing PET with 30% plant-originated plastic. So this market is really going to take off now because consumers are interested in using renewable products.
Higher levels of oleic acid can't be produced in safflower through conventional plant breeding methods because it simply doesn't have enough genetic variation. Instead, one of the plant's natural processes was switched off using safflower's own DNA in a process called gene silencing.
What we had to do in the developing oilseed was to stop oleic acid being converted to other fatty acids that we didn't want. So we had to downregulate or silence the enzymes that make those conversions. To do that, we introduce a piece of safflower's own DNA back into safflower, and it interferes with that enzyme system and effectively stops that system, and so we have a build-up of oleic acid.
The new material is grafted to a growing stalk to produce seed for the next generation.
We induce these little calli here, and they end up being genetically modified shoots, and these plants extend and mature into genetically modified safflower plants.
For growers, the Biofactories initiative could propagate a new industry within a decade.
We're probably 5 to 7 years from the crop being available to growers in Australia. We still have to develop the final varieties, test them in the field, and have the GM trait deregulated.
Estimates put production potential at 100,000 hectares, and safflower varieties have been tailored to suit regions from South Australia to Queensland. The Australian grains industry also has the necessary regulations in place to capitalise on the outcomes of the Biofactories initiative.
And we also have a series of regulatory processes that allow genetically modified crops to grow. And we also have a series of segregation policies that allow genetically modified crops to be segregated from their non-genetically modified siblings. So in some respects, Australia has a fantastic architecture ready for this kind of crop to grow and to thrive.
It's an opportunity for growers to diversify.
A lot of GRDC investments are trying to address a problem, whereas the Crop Biofactories initiative is really trying to take advantage of an opportunity that we see and helping to position growers to take advantage of that opportunity.
And when you think safflower originally came to our shores in the 50s as an industrial crop for paint and resin production, it's fitting this undervalued oilseed comes full circle, revamped as a 21st century industrial commodity.
It is exciting for safflower and exciting for Australian grain growers because although super high oleic acid is hopefully the first trait for bioproducts and biomaterials, is that there are many other research-related ideas out there that could be well suited for safflower into the future.
I'd reckon all the advisors here today would agree that providing solutions is not a case of one size fits all. Now the same applies to breeding programs, and while Pulse Breeding Australia's chickpea program is nationally coordinated, part of its objective is to provide growers with regional solutions. And in WA, a new variety is delivering exactly that. Around 12,000 hectares of chickpeas were sown last season in WA. It's a long way short of the 70,000 hectares sown in the late 90s. What caused the dramatic fall in production back then was an outbreak of Ascochyta blight, followed by a series of dry seasons. Two factors that were to impact on what was grown and the size of farming operations.
There are a lot of growers with very fond memories of growing chickpeas in the late 90s and making quite good profits per hectare. But in the last 10 years we've got a lot less growers in the system and they've basically got bigger farms. And so logistically, incorporating a pulse into the rotation any new crop into the rotation becomes a bit of a logistic nightmare.
Grain growers weren't the only ones with nightmares. Ascochyta blight gave pulse breeders plenty to worry about too.
Well, it can cause the complete about-face or change of direction of the breeding programs from being one based of just looking at yield and crop architecture, canopy, etc., to have to look at tolerance, resistance for Ascochyta blight. So our local breeding programs had to look elsewhere in the world for those levels of resistance and tolerance to bring back to Australia.
Chickpea breeding was now on a new course, and then in 2006, pulse breeding was to be impacted again. This time it was welcomed by the industry.
In 2006, the main players of pulse breeding in Australia got together with GRDC and formed Pulse Breeding Australia, which has allowed a more coordinated and efficient approach to pulse breeding for Australian growers.
Pulse Breeding Australia's mantra is to deliver better pulse varieties faster, and with new chickpea varieties released in Central Queensland and New South Wales last year, this season's release of 603 in the western and southern regions maintains PBA's commitment.
CISA 603 has been trialled throughout southern Australia, and its yield results compared to PBA Slasher are better than PBA Slasher in most agricultural regions within the southern zone. So yes, even though it is very well adapted for WA, it is well suited to southern Australia.
What makes 603 such a well-adapted variety for Western Australia is that it's an early flowering, early maturity variety compared to that state's stock standard chickpea, Genesis 836.
So it gives greater flexibility for growers to be able to put it in earlier, which is great for management. And it's also got a bigger seed size and a little bit nicer colour than PBA Slasher and Genesis 836. So we can use it in the markets as a whole or split grain.
Part of PBA's success is its ability to deliver regional solutions from a national breeding base.
While the call-up breeding activities occurring here at Tamworth, each region has its own specific adaptation requirements. So we use the key intellect through our collaborators in those regions to deliver targeted varieties for the regions.
Chickpea growers in the West will also have the choice of the final 2 new varieties to come from a state-based breeding program run by the Council of Grain Growers Organisations, or COGO. Genetic material from that now concluded chickpea program will be incorporated into PBA's programs.
It contains a lot of very, very good material, both in disease terms and yield terms, and a range of architecture types which are going to suit different parts of the Australian farming landscape.
CISA 603 doesn't only give WA's grain growers a new chickpea variety, but it provides another option when making crop sequencing decisions. In one East Coast region, chickpeas have become more than a rotation option.
In central Queensland, chickpeas have established themselves as an integral part of the rotation, and it's so successful that growers need to be careful that they don't infringe on the 3-year rotation phase for chickpeas to ensure their disease risks are low in the future.
The chickpea industry is anticipating record production this year, with a national crop in excess of 500,000 hectares. And even if Western Australia can return to pre-Ascochyta blight production levels in coming years, growers should feel assured they will have a market, according to Pulse Australia's Alan Meldrum.
We see the domestic demand of chickpeas in the Indian subcontinent as being quite insatiable, and I don't think there's any risk of, certainly in Western Australia's case, going back to that 60 to 70,000 tonnes of production having any effect on market demand. And even with an increased production in the eastern states, I still don't think that the market demand rather is going to change to any degree, and growers could be quite assured that the market demand will be high enough to make chickpeas a sustainable part of their rotation.
There are more promising chickpea varieties in the pipeline, and while there are many traits flagged for improvement, perhaps the one that growers will take most encouragement from is knowing that they've been selected to perform even in a poor season.
In very good years, yes, everything performs well, and you might get your 3.5 tonnes per hectare, but really I think growers need to concentrate on the bottom end yields, and we've really taken a step up from those odds like 800 kilos to a tonne bottom end yields, and we're more at the like 1.2, 1.5 tonnes per hectare.
The outlook for the chickpea industry has improved enormously over the past decade, and what's helped make that turnaround possible is the delivery of improved varieties suited to specific regions. And while Pulse Breeding Australia's nationally coordinated chickpea program continues to deliver regionally, growers have reason to be confident about the industry's future. In the current issue of Groundcover newspaper, you'll find an article on global pulse trends. The keynote speaker at today's Farm Business Update spoke about the economic factors impacting on farmers, and we'll speak to him a little later in the show. But before we do that, something else that impacts grain production in particular parts of this country is soil acidity.
Soil acidity is widespread throughout Western Australia's wheat belt and results in an estimated $400 to $500 million loss in annual production. It's why the Grains Research and Development Corporation has previously supported soil acidity research in the state. And while currently the federal government's Caring for Our Country program is contributing funding to a joint state government and private enterprise project.
What we're really trying to target is the soil pH at 10 to 30 centimetres through this zone here.
These two men are key researchers in this soil acidity project.
There are a few heavier soil types which are not yet at risk that have higher pHs, but generally, we're in Western Australia dominated by sandy soils, and most of those soils have got low pHs, about 80% of the wheat belt, and yes, across the whole wheat belt.
Under the Caring for Our Country soil acidity project, grain growers are able to have soil samples taken on a cost-share basis. The landholder pays for the top 10 centimetres of the sample, while the federal government covers the cost of the next 20 centimetres. It's the deeper soil sampling that is critical, as it's where acidity levels are most problematic.
We acidify those two layers, the 10 to 20 and the 20 to 30 centimetre layers, and they are the areas that need to be identified so that liming requirements can be produced.
While we've been getting benefits and advances in other areas of agriculture, it's been against a negative background of increasing acidification. I think now that we've got to a point where it's one of the most limiting factors on much of the farms, we're actually seeing...
While soils naturally acidify, albeit very slowly, there are two major contributing factors to WA's soil acidity problem. One is the inefficient use of nitrogen-based fertiliser, and the other is the removal of plant material that would otherwise return some alkalinity to the soil.
The effects of acidity are insidious, if you like. They're not highly visible, as if you had a nutrient deficiency in the crop. The effects of acidity in the subsurface prevent access to moisture and nutrients, so you have a sort of a less thrifty crop.
How acidity affects roots from taking up sufficient water and nutrient is a complex chemical process, one that involves the breakdown of ammonium nitrogen into nitrate and hydrogen ions. Excess nitrate ions are leached down into the soil profile, attracting oppositely charged nutrients such as sodium, potassium or calcium as they go. Hydrogen ions left behind lower the soil's pH level, increasing soil acidity. Plant organic matter tends to be slightly alkaline, and if it's returned to the soil, it can tie up some of these free hydrogen ions, which help to correct the pH balance. The organic matter has another benefit in that it keeps naturally occurring aluminium bound up. However, low levels of organic matter and an acidic soil pH allows the aluminium to dissolve into the soil water and become toxic to plant roots. The result is that plants don't get the moisture and nutrient needed to do well, so crop yields decline.
Most of the nutrients are more available if you've got that sort of pH somewhere between 5.5 and 6 in the surface, where most of the nutrients are. Herbicides can have better effect, the crops can be stronger, and they can compete with weeds better. So lots of other parts of the jigsaw all fit in.
While the West's wheat belt soils might be more susceptible to acidification compared to the eastern states, the West has one thing the East doesn't: good deposits of high-quality, fine-grained lime sand.
Well, one of the advantages of lime sand compared to limestone is that nature's already crushed it for us, so there's no crushing cost. It's got a fine particle size, which is important. It reacts quickly. It's got high neutralising value. It's a highly pure source.
WA has a number of lime pits along the coast, and this one at Lancelin, about an hour and a half's drive north of Perth, has one of the largest marketing footprints, supplying lime to farms up to 600 kilometres away.
Pits like this are quite rare throughout the world. They're the result of the crushed coral and seashell that was once the ocean floor being exposed as the seas receded over many thousands of years. Then the westerly winds picked up this lime and blew it onshore to become these mobile sand dunes.
Over the last 15 years, on-farm lime use has increased from around 100,000 tonnes a year up to 1 million tonnes, but more is needed.
Extrapolating from the work we did in the central wheat belt, we now estimate that about 2.5 million tonnes of lime is required per year for the next 10 years in order to get the wheat belt to a place where soil acidity is not constraining most of our farming practices.
In 2011, a WA Department of Agriculture and Food survey of 110 grain growers found only a third took soil samples down to 30 centimetres. It's not the only farm practice which this project is demonstrating needs change. Research has shown 75% of farmers spread lime as a blanket application. Based on 18,000 samples, lime spread at a rate of 1 tonne to the hectare was likely to be correct for 35% of the area, too little for 42%, and too much for 23%.
In Calabarin, we were fortunate enough to be able to go and visit a trial that a farmer had set up 17 years earlier, and it had various rates of lime at 0, 2.5 and 5 tonnes of lime. Again, those could have been applied not all in one go but over a period. The soil pH profiles on those different treatments, the highly limed one or the 5 tonne per hectare lime one reached our targets, and there were spectacular responses in both wheat and barley, and also a clear demonstration that the unlimed profiles, which were quite acidic, had more weeds and obviously less yield.
DAFWA recommends growers soil test to establish their soil pH profile so they can then determine the lime application rate needed over a 10-year recovery period. Often that will be 2 tonnes per hectare at the start of the recovery phase and may well include additional applications. When soil pH targets are reached, lime applications can revert to maintenance rates. The benefits gained in terms of improved crop yields will outweigh the cost of adding lime.
Well, lime is a very cheap component for farming compared to lots of other inputs. One of the difficulties is that it tends to be a coastal resource and it needs to go inland. So there's high freight costs, but in Western Australia we're lucky. Lime's less than $10 a tonne as a general statement, sources like this. So compared to the eastern seaboard where they might be paying $30, $40, $50 a tonne, we're obviously in a lot better position.
Lime's soil pH neutralising qualities are slow to take effect when compared to responses to fertiliser, which is why Chris Gazy talks about it taking years to achieve the soil pH targets following liming. What grain growers can do to speed up the process is source the finest lime, because the smaller particles react quicker, and the higher the neutralising value, the greater the change in pH. And to help do that, Lime WA's website provides lime specification data.
What we recommend is farmers go have a look at those specification sheets, find a calculator that they can plug those numbers into, and that would give them the closest source of the finest and the best lime that is most cost effective on their farm.
As I mentioned, the key speaker at the Bendigo Farm Business Update spoke about economic factors impacting on farmers. And with me now is the very man, economist Stephen Koukoulas. Stephen, what was the key thing that you had to say to the farmers gathered here today?
Look, the key thoughts were firstly that the overall economy is doing pretty well. We've got solid growth occurring and it'll probably continue for the next year or so. But within that we've got this two-speed economy. Some sectors booming, going very, very well. Other parts of the economy that are in the slow lane, performing quite poorly, and that's the policy challenge and the management challenge, I guess, for the economy over the next year.
That's been going on for a bit. What changes do you see coming?
For farmers, what would happen, I think, in an era where we do get a fall in mineral prices, is that the Aussie dollar would fall. There's a nice correlation between the level of the Australian dollar and what happens to the commodity prices more generally, obviously over the last little while with the Aussie dollar at parity, the driver of that has been these high prices that we're getting for coal and iron ore and natural gas, these sorts of things. If they come off, then I think the Aussie dollar is going to be coming off with it. And of course, the other thing that's important for Australia is, of course, interest rates. Our interest rates, even though they're relatively low, they're still higher than most other parts of the world. Money's flowing in here, and if I'm right and we see the RBA cutting interest rates a few more times, then we'll see this Aussie dollar pull back. Yeah, maybe we do see 90 cents rather than 110 for the Aussie.
So when that mineral boom goes off the boil and the dollar drops, presumably that's actually going to drive interest rates up.
Oh, that's the critical thing, because you're spot on that if we do get the Aussie back at 90 cents, say during 2013, then of course that puts upward pressure on imported prices. You know, one reason at the moment why we've had nice low inflation has been the Aussie dollar has lowered the price of capital equipment, consumer goods. So we've seen this inflation rate come down partly because the Aussie dollar's been so strong. Imported prices are falling. So if we do get the Aussie falling, you get inflation back up, and then of course the RBA hikes. But I think that's a question more for the middle of 2013 rather than before then.
Interestingly, for agriculture, you had something to say about what replaces the mineral boom when it eventually comes off the boil.
This is the Asian century, what's going on, and they're going to be demanding goods and services from Australia. So we've got the mining sector worked out. We're supplying them tons of coal and iron ore and energy. The critical issue is now is to build up this agricultural sector so that we're producing a lot of the food that they want to buy. And I think that's where the future is going to be. And if we can do it well, if the farmers can come on board, if the government can get its act together with the infrastructure spend and get the network right, I'm optimistic over the longer run.
On another optimistic note, you don't see a recession on the way.
Look, I don't see any recession in Australia. We've been lucky that it's been 21 years now since we had a recession back in the early 90s. We're still growing. The economy's still growing about 3.5%. And if we do get some negative inflow from the world economy still looks quite sick to me. But if that does happen, we'll get the Reserve Bank cutting rates more. They've got plenty of scope to do so. So we've got an official rate of 3.5. So in a worst case, we could have the RBA cutting 100, 200 basis points, so really aggressively. That's good, that'll help. The other thing is that as this dollar comes down, if we get a worst case scenario, my 90 cent forecast for the Aussie for next year will be too optimistic, it'll fall even more. Just think back to the GFC, we got down into the 60s for a short period only, but if the world changed its assessment of commodity prices, the Aussie dollar falls, and that's a safety valve, if you like, for the Australian economy. And on the budget, despite all of our discussion about government debt and these sort of things, we're actually really well placed. So, when we get the election out of the way next year, if we have a hard landing globally and that impacts on Australia, frankly, we've got the scope for the government of the day, whoever it is, to spend up a little bit, to give us some tax relief, to keep this growth continuing. So I'm optimistic we won't see a recession, barring some almighty disaster globally.
Stephen Koukoulas, thanks for joining us on Groundcover TV. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Now, like this update, the Australian Durum Wheat Improvement Program is about improving industry capacity and grower returns. And as this next story shows, it's producing results.
Doug Cush's family has been growing wheat in northern New South Wales since 1908.
I'm a generational farmer. My grandfather was a farmer. His forefathers were farmers.
For the past 25 years, they've grown durum wheat. And now, as well as supplying grain to others, they also mill their own semolina and manufacture high-quality pasta. Like Doug's boutique pasta plant, Australia's durum wheat story is a small but successful one. We may not export as much durum as the EU, Canada or the USA, but thanks to this region's rainfall patterns and relatively fertile soils and Australia's high-quality varieties, our durum is in demand from pasta-making connoisseurs.
The quality is exceptional for our crop. Worldwide, there are some 35 million tonnes produced, and we only produce about 500,000 tonnes on average. But it is bought for the purposes of blending with other lower quality grades. And it's particularly sought after by the Italians.
Durum can provide significantly higher returns than bread wheats.
For example, in 2011, at about harvest time, there was a very significant price difference that at one time was about went from $80 or $100 price difference per tonne.
Though price differentials make durum an attractive prospect for growers, susceptibility to drought and crown rot has restricted local production. But thanks to ADWIP, the Australian Durum Wheat Improvement Program, better traits are in the pipeline. A GRDC-funded collaboration between the University of Adelaide and the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, ADWIP commenced its second 5-year program of plant breeding and testing in July to improve industry capacity and grower returns.
Australia's durum breeding program has a history spanning 60 years. The new program is set to build on the foundations of that past breeding work, specifically addressing the issues of crown rot, improve yield and drought tolerance while maintaining quality.
It's a complex selection process involving numerous tests for yield and quality traits throughout the entire pasta production cycle. As well as examining plant properties, the team perform their own milling of semolina, then go on to manufacture pasta, testing each step of the way to ensure a high-quality product that meets the different needs of millers and pasta makers.
Millers are interested in the amount of semolina they can produce from, say, 100 tonnes of wheat. For the pasta maker, they're more interested in a uniform semolina of nice bright colour, with no impurities in the grain, no weather damage, and the kind of dough properties that we've either got now or we can strive for that match the US desert durums, considered to be some of the best in the world.
Desert durum is produced under irrigation in the deserts of Arizona and California, and its uniformity of seed size and colour contribute to good yields of semolina. This season, durum growers in southern regions had access to 3 new superior varieties from the breeding program: Chilkari, WID802 and WID803. All have Australian premium durum grading.
They'll be improvements over the current varieties like Hyperno, Sately, Calca and Tamaroi, in things like colour and yield and processing ability.
Further north, Caparoi, released 2 years ago, has shown improvements over previous varieties.
And Caparoi has got all the quality traits of Bellaroi, but it's also got the ability to yield under drought.
The breeding team is currently testing even better cultivars for durum growers in the north.
We've got 5 new varieties that are in the NVT system that are undergoing evaluation at the moment. Some of them represent really significant yield improvement over Caparoi, and we're quite excited about it.
These new varieties are set to improve grower confidence when it comes to delivering premium grade durum.
The best thing about our lines is that they have got a very good ability to put extra protein into the grain, and they are more assured to make the ADR1 grade.
Through GRDC's International Germplasm Exchange project, the team has access to genetic material from overseas, which could fast-track improvements in Australian varieties.
Well production is pretty much static, but the demand for pasta is increasing, particularly in Asia, and we see a potential there.
Asia is also where Doug Cush believes there's significant opportunity.
I think there's huge potential. Asia is a growing market, but we need an industry that can capitalise on that growth.
A stronger industry producing a consistent volume of well-marketed export durum will ensure Australia takes advantage of increasing demand.
Keeping up with what's going on overseas, keeping ahead of them in the competition, promoting the product that we produce and finding those overseas markets and consistently supplying the good quality of those markets. If we can do that, we'll always have the markets.
Like GRDC, Doug Cush sees value in dollars spent to ensure a more profitable and secure future for growers.
The investment into the industry is vital to have a really modern breeding program. Absolutely vital if this industry is to take its place in Asia.
New varieties allowing industry expansion will ensure Australia's world-renowned durum gains a permanent and expanding share of the global market.
This Bendigo update is just one of many new things happening at GRDC lately, but perhaps the most important development is the corporation's new 5-year strategic plan. I caught up with Managing Director John Harvey in northern New South Wales recently to ask him about that and a number of other things. You've been spending a lot of time out and about, including beyond the borders of this country. What's that been about? What have you been up to?
We're probably doing about 2% of the world's research in grains. We know 6 major biotech companies are spending something like $5 billion a year on R&D. And it's really important that we know what's happening out there, and we're identifying early technologies that might be relevant to Australian growers. So over the last month, I've been overseas with our chairman, Keith Perrett, looking at some of those companies and some of the technologies they potentially have that might be of interest to Australian growers.
Exciting stuff happening in Europe while you were there?
And a lot of these companies are looking at expanding their marketplace by investing in developing better wheat, traits for wheat, and that's pretty exciting for Australia, I think. But I guess if we're going to succeed, we need to make sure our growers get early access to those technologies.
What did you achieve, do you think, in terms of getting early access to those technologies?
Well, at this stage, the trip was very much preliminary. It was very much about making people aware of who GRDC is and making people aware that we do have a viable marketplace here for those technologies. So at the moment, that was the key reason for going there, and I think we achieved that very satisfactorily.
You've just released GRDC's 5-year strategic plan, and it's something of a culmination of the last 18 months. What does it signify?
It's a very important milestone. I mean, it really is setting the direction for the corporation for the next 5 years, and obviously that's important. And I guess the key thing, the drivers in that 5-year plan are that we want the investment growers making the GRDC levy to be the best investment that they make. We want to make sure that we really are focusing the investment on the things that are going to make the biggest difference for Australian grain growers. To summarise, focus on the things that make the biggest difference, and delivery into each of the regions, connecting globally. Those are the key things I think that will make us successful.
Are you glad to be out of that intensive planning phase and into a phase where you can really roll up your sleeves?
Look, it has been fairly intense, and it's been intense for a couple of reasons. We've been through that process of actually developing up the 5-year strategy, and there's a lot of work from everybody within GRDC into that process, but we've also been preparing by making some structural changes within GRDC so that we can deliver that 5-year plan. So we've now gone, for example, from 6 business groups, we've only gone down to 4 business groups, so we've gone from 6 executive managers to 4. And that's again about trying to get focus into the key things that are going to be important for the next 5-year period.
It's very important to you, I know, to communicate what GRDC is all about and its directions. The next few months is going to give you plenty of opportunity to do that?
Absolutely, and of course we've got all the spring tours, regional panels on their spring tours will be out there talking to growers. Again, as I say, I'm keen to actually bring GRDC closer to growers, make sure that connection's really strong, because that's why we exist. The only reason we exist is to deliver value to Australian grain growers.
Finally, today, you and the GRDC board are here at the IA Watson Research Centre in Narrabri, University of Sydney. What does this signify about the way GRDC will operate into the future?
I guess over the last couple of years we've been developing up with our partners a national RD&E strategy, and that really comes out of the fact that resources for R&D are limited, can't afford duplication or fragmentation of the investment. So we've been looking at where we need key facilities, and it's really clear that Narrabri and the IA Watson Research Centre in particular is a key facility for Australian research. It's right in the middle of the grains belt for the northern region. It's on the right soil type, it's got water, and so when we're looking at developing some of our pre-reading and developing traits, it's the right spot.
So you see GRDC's project investment here as very strategic?
It's absolutely a strategic investment. It's for the long term. We are hoping that we're ensuring that this becomes a hub for research for the northern region. Very much focused on the winter cereals, but delivering right through for the northern region.
John, as always, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks.
Better and more informed management is why all these people are here today, and a management support tool known as the Weed Seed Wizard is helping farm advisors and their grain grower clients make decisions that will reduce weed seed banks in their paddocks and the cost of controlling those weeds.
Weeds have been a perennial problem for grain growers ever since the first sod was turned. and finding ways to get rid of them has been the subject of many discussions, a lot of research, and the development of many tools, including some that use computer modelling, such as the Weed Seed Wizard.
Yeah, I've heard a story that the Wizard started with, I think it was a GRDC workshop where a whole bunch of agronomists, farmers and scientists got together, and there was a list of projects put up on the wall, and a general vote was taken about which one would seem most relevant to people. And consistently over a couple of workshops, the idea of a calculating tool to keep track of weed seed banks came up as something that people thought was desirable, researchers and the farmers themselves.
And the Weed Seed Wizard began to materialise, firstly as a project under the Cooperative Research Centre for Australian Weed Management, then further developed into a more user-friendly decision support tool by these R&D partners in a GRDC-supported project, nationally coordinated by Sally Peltzer of WA's Department of Agriculture and Food. What the Wizard can do is take real farm data, such as what weed species are present, herbicides used, when they were applied, rainfall records, what crops were sown and when, and their harvest dates, and use that data to calculate the rise and fall of the weed population throughout the year and over a number of years.
Another important thing we would need to calibrate is the initial seed bank. So usually a farmer isn't going to know exactly how many weed seeds were in the field when they begin. So we would need to move that up and down until the predictions matched what the actual observations of weeds were in the field. They could be detailed observations if the farmer was able to collect that kind of information, but they could be more general observations, just that we knew that that year the weed numbers were low, the following year they were high, and the next year they were medium, something more general like that.
So that is actually wheat, that blue one, and the red line is your ryegrass number.
As a weed management decision support tool, the most likely users of the Wizard are farm advisors and researchers such as Peter Newman.
Yeah, the great thing about the Wizard program for me is we get a yield graph where we get an estimate of the potential yield, whereas this blue bit here refers to the amount of yield that the weeds are removing from that crop.
Which in the case of ryegrass in a cereal crop could result in as much as a 25% loss in income.
I mean, in a high yielding crop like last year where we had wheat going 4 tonne plus, I mean 25% of that can be a tonne to the hectare, and at a couple of $100 a tonne farm gate, that's the sort of cost in a single year.
As well as giving farmers financial advice, Cameron Weeks runs a GRDC Regional Cropping Solutions Network in WA's Northern Ag region. The network's task is to identify priority issues and investigate research and development opportunities. Weeds have been identified as a priority issue, and better integrated weed management decision support tools are wanted.
Say a chaff cat's going to cost you $60,000. We can easily, calculate what that's going to cost you on a per hectare basis, amortise it over time, etc. The bit that's been harder to quantify is actually the benefit. So the stuff that Peter was, showing us with the Weed Seed Wizard model was really helping us quantify yield loss, and yield loss in seasons that have actually already been. So helping us quantify, I think, the benefits as much as anything is where I can see the Weed Seed Wizard actually helping, people like myself.
Cameron Weeks' colleague and agronomist, Peter Elliott Lockhart, believes the Weed Seed Wizard will help identify when integrated weed management practices should be undertaken and the cost of using them.
Crop topping timings can impact on yields. Chaff carts take time and you've still got heaps to burn, and so there's a timeliness aspect to some of this integrated weed management. And I think the tool will actually give us a good chance to look at what we can do and what the time implications and the cost implications are going to be for that. And that'll give us a good opportunity to start to talk through some of those issues and perhaps target the more problem paddocks.
A lot of these integrated weed management tools are only 50% sort of weed control, so we need to know how many of those we need to stack up to get an effective decline of the weed seed bank, to get effective weed control. So the Wizard model allows us to add a number of different integrated weed management tools that, and then show the result over a period of a rotation.
Tim Critch farms 12,000 hectares and grows mainly wheat. The run of dry seasons has forced him to make cropping decisions that have also impacted his weed management.
Yeah, we do try and sow a fairly large proportion of our crop dry
That probably gives us our best yielding crops, so the best return is our dry sign crops, and that again, I guess, is putting a lot of pressure back onto those herbicide groups that are trying to control weeds in crop.
The big deal with weed seed management is that growers in this part of the world, they want to early sow a big area of crop every year, and that's how they can make money out of investing in integrated weed management. So the Weed Seed Wizard model will tell them whether they're on the right track and help them make those investment decisions.
Enormous pressure on every chemical you use, isn't
it?
Yeah.
The data loaded into the Weed Seed Wizard currently applies to the western and southern grain growing regions. However, the Wizard has been built to evolve, and as new weed species start to impact grain regions and new herbicides come on stream, they'll be added to the database. And by the end of the year, there'll be a northern version of the Wizard as well.
But the creation of a model always involves synthesising a whole lot of knowledge, and this project has required synthesis of some detailed biological understanding of the different weed species, detailed understanding of the way that herbicides work, detailed understanding of the way that different harvest management techniques can work. So all of that information has been put together in the Wizard, and I think that synthesis process is really valuable in its own sake. So the people that have worked on the project gain a bigger, broader understanding because of that. And the model becomes a repository, a record of that information synthesis, and that will also carry on into the future as well.
There'll be 2-hour Wizard workshops for farm advisors across the western and southern regions later in 2012. For more information on those workshops and how to download your Weed Seed Wizard, go to either of these 2 websites, Weed Links at GRDC, or look under Weed Seed Wizard on DAFWA's Grains Gateway. And while we're giving plugs, GRDC's update series are a great way to stay in touch with the latest in grains research. There's updates for growers, updates for advisors. For a full list, get onto GRDC's website. They're fantastic. Something else that's new at GRDC is the appointment of 3 regional grower services managers. 221 people applied, almost certainly some of the people in this room. It was a tough selection process, but eventually 3 top contenders emerged. And we thought we'd turn Groundcover's camera onto this trio to find out a little more about your new GRDC Regional Grower Services Managers. Darren Hughes was already an experienced GRDC hand when he applied for the Western Region position. He was a regional panel member when the newly created role was advertised, but his contact with GRDC goes back much further, to his student days.
My PhD supervisor was a panel member and deputy panel chair at one stage, and we used to have some great philosophizing talks about R&D and where it's going within the grains industry. When the opportunity came up to apply for the panel position, I thought it was a great opportunity to actually get actively participated in the leadership and management of the grains industry research and development area.
Associating with panel members and getting first-hand experience with the R&D that GRDC was supporting whet Darren's appetite. The Regional Grower Services Manager role was the opportunity to do it all on a full-time basis.
I wanted to get more involved in the R&D management, more involved in the strategic setting of research and development, particularly here in the West. It's where I grew up, it's where I've got a great affiliation for the countryside, and it's where I've got family that farm.
His family connection with the grains industry and his early career working as a research agronomist and then as an R&D manager with a fertiliser group reinforced his view on the importance of research application.
The clear gap that I am seeing, particularly in the regions, is around the D&E sectors of the RD&E component. We need to get much greater adoption of research on farm. We've got a classic gap in terms of uptake of some of the basic principles of farming that would lift productivity and profitability of many growers.
Darren Hughes and his counterparts in the southern and northern regions will also manage GRDC's regional cropping solutions networks.
The RCSNs meet twice a year. It's a great opportunity for myself to review current projects which are going on, review some of the latest research and give updates at the RCSN projects and drive forward.
On the other side of the country, here in the New South Wales northwest slopes and plains, the small farming town of Boggabri is the base for GRDC's new Northern Regional Grower Services Manager. Sharon O'Keefe comes from 7 generations of farmers from New South Wales' Golden Triangle in the north of the state.
Hi, it's Sharon from the GRDC.
As a 15-year-old, Sharon made up her mind that agriculture was also going to be her life. And when her studies were over, she started a career as an agronomist.
Any agronomist is very farmer focused. If it doesn't give outputs and outcomes on the ground, then there's not a lot of point to it. So I guess that's the direction I'm coming into the GRDC from.
Having worked throughout northern New South Wales and much of Queensland, Sharon's established a vast network of contacts. Groundwork that she believes will come in handy in her new role with GRDC.
I've got a fairly good coverage on the agronomy teams between Queensland and New South Wales for most of the major companies and a lot of the private agros. I guess I've been around the traps and I grew up in it, so yeah, I'm hoping that I'll be able to be that bridge between Canberra and what's actually happening out in the different regions.
Research and trial work have been a significant part of Sharon's past, but it's the extension, the actual implementation of practice change on farm that means most.
I came from a fairly heavy extension background. I did do a thesis, so I've done research over the years and I've certainly been involved with trial work. I had a lot to do with Landmark's trial agronomy team. So I enjoy the trial work, but I really like the extension because in my mind, until you get a practice change from a farmer and they're doing something different that's getting a result, then it doesn't matter how much research is done.
There's one other member of this new trio to introduce to you, and his patch is the southern region. The third of GRDC's new Regional Grower Services Managers is Andrew Rice, and to meet him we're going to Parkes. The southern region covers the bottom half of New South Wales, as well as Victoria and Tasmania, and of course the grain growing areas of South Australia. It's pretty big territory. Andrew Rice was born and raised in Parkes, growing up on a mixed farm. In partnership with his 2 brothers, the farm is still operated as a grain and livestock business.
We act like a board of directors. We've got some clear roles and responsibilities there. Richard, the youngest of the 3 brothers, he's the farm manager, he's the hands-on, he's got the day-to-day responsibilities around the operation of the business. Jeffrey, stock and station agency background, quite obviously he's going to have a keen interest in where we are with strategic decisions around livestock marketing. My background in farm management consulting, I'm the obvious choice for being the number cruncher. So it ends up being a good mix of 3 individuals, 3 brothers, but each using the sort of skills that they bring to the business.
Those clear lines of responsibility in the partnership have made it possible for Andrew to hold down a successful full-time off-farm career in farm consulting.
Managing an off-farm job while maintaining a close interest in our family farm has been, it's not something new, it's something that I've done over the last 19 years. And I think in the end it's what makes me me. Gives me the sort of depth of knowledge that I believe in the end will be quite crucial for me to delivering my responsibilities with GRDC.
Like Darren Hughes in the West, Andrew Rice has been a regional panel member, serving 2 terms on the Southern panel. He's also chaired GRDC's South Eastern Research Advisory Committee, and like Sharon O'Keefe in the North, he believes their role is to make a real difference.
Keeping it real, I think, is something that GRDC is very conscious of. It's something that was a real driving force behind why 3 regional managers, and it was about trying to get GRDC's businesses, the business that they operate on behalf of industry, back closer to the industry itself and most particularly growers. So a keen, close grower connection is something very much that I look forward to bringing to this role.
To contact your Regional Grower Services Manager, just email them using their GRDC email address, and that's firstname.lastname@grdc.com.au. The information delivered by today's guest speakers here in Bendigo will help these advisors, accountants, financial advisors and bankers find answers to some of the issues their farmer clients face. On the other side of the country, another GRDC supported project is also providing answers to one of the grains industry's emerging challenges, fungicide resistance.
This is a model of CYP51, a protein found in the pathogen that causes the fungal disease barley powdery mildew. What makes this particular fungal protein very significant is that if a strain of barley powdery mildew is to become resistant to a fungicide, it most likely will be because of a mutation in this gene.
Fungicides that used to be successful at controlling barley powdery mildew, particularly tebuconazole and triademinol, are now failing to control those fungicides. And that's the phenotypic side of things. That's actually the fungus growing on the plant and us observing what's going on. The other side of the coin, and this is where we're using research from overseas very intensively, is that we know that resistance to these fungicides, this DMI class of fungicides, is almost always due to changes in the gene sequence of a gene called CYP51 or CYP51.
The failure of fungicides to control powdery mildew in Western Australian barley has resulted in a massive build-up of pathogen. Any strains within that population that have developed fungicide resistance have an even better opportunity to further multiply and mutate. A mutation results in an approximate 10-fold increase in resistance. What has compounded the problem is the sowing of susceptible barley varieties.
The best barley variety in WA in terms of quality is very, very susceptible to powdery mildew. Traditionally, we've been able to control powdery mildew with quite cheap triazoles, and this form of fungicide is now broken down completely in WA, and because you have a susceptible variety that you can continually have to spray, that opened up the opportunity for resistance.
Professor Oliver's team has been taking isolates from field samples of the fungus and exposing them to the various fungicides at different concentrations. Resistant isolates have their DNA sequenced and cross-checked against mutations known to have resistance to the DMI, also known as the triazole, group of fungicides.
The issue, though, is that this stepwise process of mutation that we see happening, or we have seen happening in Europe. So if we have resistance to mutations, resistance to fungicides like tebuconazole, which take just 1 or 2 mutations, that's the stepping stone to getting resistance to these newer fungicides like prothioconazole, Prosaro, and epoxyconazole like Opus. That might occur when we accumulate together a whole batch of mutations in the gene. And this scenario might happen if we continue to allow a very large population of the fungus to grow on susceptible plants and give those already mutant population a chance to mutate a second, third and fourth time, which is really the nightmare scenario.
Modelling the CYP51 protein and its mutations allows the team to see which fungicides fit with the protein's substrate binding pocket, like a key in a lock.
Therefore we can say a particular mutation or set of mutations on the gene are associated with resistance, say, to tebuconazole, but sensitivity to, say, epoxyconazole. And that's very sophisticated work that we're using by collaborating with our European colleagues.
Identification of mutants and establishing if they are sensitive or resistant to fungicides will also provide barley breeders with valuable genetic data.
In our terms, we say which avirulence genes have they got or which haven't they got. So which race are they? On that basis, we can then say to the breeders, it's a waste of time using this resistance gene, but this resistance gene is still working. And therefore we can say to growers, use this cultivar, which is resistant, and not that cultivar, which is fallen over. So if growers adopt resistant cultivars, we'll have much, much less of the pathogen around. Therefore, there will be much less opportunity for it to mutate and for those mutated strains to then be selected by the fungicides.
What will help growers to reduce further losses to barley powdery mildew in the short term is to sow newer, less susceptible varieties next season and be more selective of the fungicides they use. And if any grower nationwide has powdery mildew in their barley crop, especially if they're growing newer varieties, contact Richard Oliver, who will arrange for a sample to be tested.
Most of the barley varieties in the east are more resistant than we've been using in the west, so they're starting from a better position than we are. But certainly we are worried about this on a national scale. Powdery mildew is a pathogen that doesn't respect state boundaries. It blows around hundreds of kilometres in a few days, so it should be no problem to get from west to east. We're also interested to hear from growers if they had failures of some of the newer fungicides, such as Opus, Opera, Amistar and so on, Prezaro. Because if they are failing, then we need to replace those with the yet newer fungicides and bring forward our program for introducing what you might call the third class of fungicides.
Providing barley breeders and growers with options is within reach, and the barley industry should take confidence from knowing GRDC will continue to support this research, according to its Western Region Chairman, Peter Roberts.
We have to continue to evolve this investment to make sure that we have options available for control. And of course the other angle is to breed the resistance into the cultivar. But that's been quite difficult, and Richard works in that area as well.
We've got all the tools available to control it. We just need to implement them, and then we'll be on top of this pathogen in a few years, I hope.
Of course, one other thing that helps spread that barley powdery mildew and other fungal pathogens is having a green bridge between crops. So remember to follow up after harvest to reduce those risks. Just one more thing to remind you of, as you'll have noticed, this issue of Groundcover newspaper is the 100th edition. It's a fantastic milestone, so our special feature puts faces to the key people behind its pages, and we hear a few untold stories from its archives. Here's a preview.
I received a phone call from a farmer's wife, and in the family there was her husband and 3 sons who were working the farm. Now she rang up because that particular morning Groundcover had arrived, and there was virtually, in her words, a fight over who was going to get to read it first.
To watch the full feature, just go to the DVD's menu and select Special Feature. Can't be easier. Well, that's it from Bendigo. I'll be back with the next episode of Groundcover TV in January. Hope your harvest goes well, and we'll see you in the new year. Bye-bye.